Hi everyone, I still have a lot of things that I wanted to try to explain and talk about. Some of the things that I wanted to talk about are why I believe what's being depicted in this Simpsons episode is actually the same thing that was being described in this matrix that I did on April, Wheatfield, and Pentecost. I also wanted to explain why this is also a representation of the Great Pyramid of Giza. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick because the next thing that I want to talk about is the I Pet Goat movie. I was recently led to that, and I actually watched it all the way through, probably for the first time in a long time. I didn't realize that this video was actually only 7 minutes and 28 seconds long. If you actually go through the video, it ends at 7:27, which is the Strong's number for rapture. You see that right there, it ends at 7:27, which is interesting. And so what I wanted to explain about this video is that it's actually not evil. From what I'm seeing, I believe it's a representation of the rapture, the apocalypse, what's going to happen. It's very biblically based, and so I wanted to go over that. But first I'm going to explain what was being described in this matrix, which was coming up in Isaiah 6 and 7, and what is being represented by the Holy Seed, and why this is a representation of the same thing that's being depicted in the Simpsons episode. And it's interesting that at this point of the video I had happened to put in the term half, and the word half was going right through the Holy Seed, and that's exactly what's being represented in the Simpsons episode, which I'll go over. But you also had the word oil going through that as well. It was sharing the O in Jehovah, and then you had the I over here, and then it was sharing the L in holy, and the word half was sharing the L in holy. And what I was talking about was the 5 wise virgins, how they had oil, and there was a total of 10 virgins. You see the number 10 right here is part of the word tent, but it also comes up in ELS form. And so I was explaining how half had oil and the other half didn't. And the word half was cutting right through the word holy seed, and that's actually what's being represented in this Simpsons episode. I'll just show you a short clip of what happens in this episode, and then I'll explain the rest of it later. But it's actually an illustration of the same thing that was in the Bible code. Okay, so the term holy seed was coming up in Isaiah 6:13. It's worded a little differently here because this is the King James, and the Bible codes were in the ASV. And so you can see the ASV translation over here. It says, "And if there be yet a tenth in it, also shall it in turn be eaten up as a terebinth, and as an oak whose stock remaineth when they are felled, so the holy seed is the stock thereof." Okay, so what's interesting is if you look at the word stock, which in the King James is the word substance, it's this word right here, Strong's number 4678, and this is actually a form of the same word that God uses to describe the Great Pyramid of Giza, and I'll show you that in just a second. Okay, that's in Isaiah 19:19, where it says, "In that day shall there be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar at the border thereof, saith the Lord." And if you look at the word pillar, it's a form of the same word. It's the word metzeba, and this is Strong's number 4676, and it means a pillar, mastaba, or stump, an altar, the stump or the stalk of a tree. And then the word that was coming up in Isaiah 6:13 was a form of the same word. It's matsebeth. And this also means a pillar, mastaba, stump, or the stalk of a tree. And so this is a form of the same word. So it's interesting that the Strong's number for this word ranges from 4676, which I've talked about before, that the height of the Great Pyramid with the capstone is 5,776 inches, and that would correlate with the Hebrew year 5776. 46 is a number having to do with DNA, and this is all a representation of DNA. It's a representation of the temple of God, the restored temple, which has to do with DNA. And then this Strong's word spans from 4676 through 4678. And of course, this is the Hebrew year 5778. Okay, and I've talked about before how there's a very similar word in the Hebrew, which is the word Giza, and this was discovered by Leland Jones. And this also means the same thing. It means the trunk or stalk of a tree, as a tree that's felled, as it was described in Isaiah 6:13. And it's interesting that this number is 153. There's 153 fish that were caught in the net, so that would represent the fullness of the Gentiles. And this is the trunk or stalk of a tree, and as you can see, it's used over here in Isaiah 11:1, where it says, "And there shall come forth a rod out of the stem, or the stalk of a tree of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots." Okay, and this is a visual representation of what that would look like. You also have this image over here. Okay, and if you go to the next verse, you see that it represents the menorah. This represents the 7 spirits of God. This is where it says, "And the Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, and the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge, and the fear of the Lord." So this is a representation of the tree of life. You have something very similar represented in Galatians 5:22, where it talks about the fruit of the Spirit. And in this one, I believe there's 17 fruits of the Spirit, but it's interesting that it comes up in Galatians 5:22 through 23, because this is all ultimately about DNA. That's what the tree represents. But if you go back to Isaiah 11:2, to this image over here, you see that there's a parallel to this in the New Testament in Revelation 4:5, where it talks about the 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. So again, you have the same imagery being represented in the New Testament. Okay, and you can see that here in Revelation 4:5, it's talking about Jesus being seated at the throne, and then it says, "And out of the throne proceeded lightnings and thunderings and voices, and there were 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. And before the throne there was a sea of glass like unto crystal, and in the midst of the throne and round about the throne were 4 beasts full of eyes before and behind." And so I've talked about before how I believe this is a representation of DNA. That's what's represented by the crystal. And it's also represented by the Great Pyramid of Giza, which is a representation of the tree of life. Okay, so I just want to show you this table that I did some time ago on the word Cheops, which is another name for the Great Pyramid of Giza. And I'm sorry for jumping around, but I think this is really important in understanding what all is being represented by the Great Pyramid of Giza and by the Tree of Life, and how this all fits in with the Simpsons episode. But what I was showing in this video, this was actually a music video that I did on the Ark of the Covenant some time ago. But over here I put in the word light, and I put in the word Cheops, because what I was showing in this video was this article over here, because this actually matched up with the movie, the Raiders of the Lost Ark and the Ark of the Covenant, where he was trying to shine a light through a medallion in order to find the Well of Souls. But as you can see in this article, it says physicists have used the byproducts of cosmic rays to reveal a large, previously unidentified chamber inside the 4,500-year-old Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt. The find is the first discovery seen in the 19th century of a major new space in the pyramid. So they found a hidden chamber in the Great Pyramid of Giza, as you can see here. And so I had put in the terms light and Cheops, and I'll go ahead and show you the table. Okay, so as you can see, I have the word light over here, and the word Cheops, and then ray is in light ray over here, and you have DNA because, as I've stated before, I believe this is all about DNA. I believe that's what's being represented here. And right at the very tip of this triangle, it seems to make a pyramid on its side, and right at the tip of the triangle you have the precious onyx, which is a precious stone, and I'll show you the word onyx. Okay, before I pull that up, keep in mind here that over here where it says the word crystal, it mentions a pure river of the water of life. Okay, the first use of the word onyx comes up in Genesis 2:12, and as you can see, there's 11 times that it's used in the King James, and as I mentioned before, 11 is a number having to do with DNA. And so this is one of the 4 rivers, the first river that flowed from the Garden of Eden. It says, and a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and it became into 4 heads. And I've talked about before how I did a table on the river of life and the tree of life, because I had speculated this all had to do with DNA, and I believe the table confirmed it, because the word DNA, strand, and the word strand were coming up in ELS form, and the word strand was coming up right over here where it talks about Adam and Eve cleaving together, and in verse 23 and 24 is where the word strand came up in ELS form. And so I believe that confirmed that this is all about DNA. But over here where it's talking about the first head of the river, where it parted into 4 heads, it says the first is Pison, which compasseth the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold of that land is good, and there is bdellium and the onyx stone. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more about the word bdellium, but I just want to show you real quick. If you look at the word here in the Strongs, you see that it comes from another word. It means a gum resin, but it comes from another word that means to divide or separate. Okay, so it's the precious onyx that's at the very tip of this pyramid, which is where the first river divides out of the 4 rivers, where there is bdellium, and then bdellium means to separate or divide. Okay, so I'll just show you that again. This is the first branch of the 4 rivers from the river in the Garden of Eden, and it says, and the gold of that land is good. There's bdellium and the onyx stone. Okay, so you have the precious onyx here, which is used 11 times in the King James, and then I'll show you the matrix, but I'll probably have to go over that in the next video. But as you can see, it comes up in Job 28, and as I've mentioned before, I believe 28 represents the year 2018, but as you can see, the matrix seems to clearly be describing the Great Pyramid of Giza. It's using the word bind over here in verse 11, which again, I believe the number 11 has to do with DNA. And then over here, it's mentioning the gold and the ophir and the precious onyx in verse 16. And then it mentions crystal over here in verse 18, which I believe is all representation of DNA, but I'll have to continue in the next video since I'm just about out of time. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.